Hello and welcome to our tutorial How to Get Started with UOS, Part 1. In this tutorial, I'd like to show you how to install UOS and other useful add-ons on a UOS device and which possibilities UOS offers you. But before we start, I would like to briefly explain what UOS actually is. To do this, I would like to compare UOS with another operating system that is in widespread use, Android. Both Android and UOS are operating systems. However, while Android is intended for use on mobile devices, UOS was designed for the automation sector and applications with a connection to the Industrial Internet of Things, or IIoT for short. Both operating systems also act as a software platform for different applications. Under UOS, we also find system settings and apps, but these relate to automation and IIoT. UOS can be installed on various devices, such as our web-based controllers UControl WL2000, M3000, and M4000, which, thanks to UOS, are not just pure PLCs, but rather edge devices that can do much more than just control machines and plants. To describe a UControl as a PLC would be like calling your smartphone just a telephone. Just as you can make phone calls with an Android smartphone, but its capabilities are by far not limited to making phone calls, you can use a UControl with UOS to automate machines and plants, but also to take advantage of a wide range of other possibilities. And because UOS is an open system, these possibilities are not limited to Weidmüller apps. Third-party apps such as Codesys or Node-RED, or a wide variety of apps from our partners, can also be installed and run here. UOS is already pre-installed on UOS devices such as the UControl. We recommend updating this firmware to the latest version as a first step. To download the latest firmware, please visit our Weidmüller website at weidmuller.com. You will find our support center at the top of the page. Click to open it and you can now search for the firmware in the search field, for example by entering the search term UOS 2.3. If you filter for firmware under software downloads, you will see the appropriate UOS firmware versions for various devices. For the UControl WL2000, for the IoT Gateway GW30 and for the UControls M3000 and M4000. In our example, we want to update the firmware on an M4000 and download the corresponding firmware. Once you have extracted the download files to a suitable folder, you will see a SWU file in your directory. We need this file for the firmware update. To perform the firmware update, we first start UOS. To do this, first connect your PC or notebook to the UControl, in our example to the M4000, shown here with Uremote modules connected to the backplane bus. You can establish a connection via one of the Ethernet ports. These have the following IP addresses by default: X4, 192.168.0.101, X5, 192.168.1.101, X6, 192.168.2.101, and X7, 192.168.3.101. Alternatively, you can use a connection via a USB-C interface on service port X1. This can be found under the service cover and has the following IP address: 192.168.10.202. This address is fixed and cannot be changed, in contrast to the addresses of the Ethernet ports. But it makes sense that way. This USB port always works, even if someone changes the other IP addresses but no one can remember them. After connecting your PC or notebook to the UOS device, open a web browser, such as Google Chrome, and enter the IP address of the port used for the connection in the address bar. In our example, I am connected to Ethernet port X4, so I enter the corresponding IP address. As no certificate has yet been set up for communication with the UOS web interface, you will first receive a privacy warning. If you would like to learn how to set up a self-signed certificate for this connection, please refer to the Weidmüller tutorial Certificate Handling on UOS. However, you can also access the web server of your UOS device without a certificate. When you start UOS for the very first time, an end-user license agreement window will appear. This license agreement can be downloaded here. If you agree to the terms and conditions, you will then be asked to create an initial user. In our example, I enter admin as the username, create a password for it and repeat the password. We are then taken to the welcome screen. Here, We first log in with the access data of the initial user we just created, that means admin and the password you specified. We are then taken to the home screen. Here you will find all the important information about the connected UOS device bundled together. Firstly, the name of the connected device, followed by information on the network connections and their states. And the version number of the UOS installation is also displayed in the upper part of this screen. But before I explain the other displays and functions in more detail, I would first like to perform a firmware update. To do this, we open the UOS Control Center. In older UOS versions, there was a button for this on the home screen. Since version 2.2, there has been a tile for this. By clicking on one of these controls, in our case the tile, we enter the Control Center. On the left-hand side, please click on Software and Update and then on Update Installation in the Update and Installation menu. In the image window, you can either open a small Explorer window with a mouse click and select the SWU file, or you can simply drag the SWU file from your Explorer into the image window. The system will then automatically start downloading this file to your UOS device and immediately begin the firmware update. This update and the automatically performed restart of the UOS device will take some time. When restarting, you will receive messages such as this site can't be reached or your connection was interrupted or something similar, because the connection to your web browser is interrupted during restart. Please be patient and do not switch off the UOS device. As soon as the connection is re-established, you will see the update and installation screen again, even without taking any action yourself. Let's go back to the home screen and take a closer look. Under UOS version, we now see the updated firmware version 2.3.0. And in the lower part, we see three tiles: the UOS I/O configurator, the UOS Data Hub and the UOS Control Center. Let's take a closer look at these tiles. We'll start with the UOS Control Center. The left-hand side lists the individual menu items for the system settings, with overview currently active. And on the right-hand side, we see the corresponding displays and, where applicable, setting options for these menu items. The overview menu item displays information similar to that on the home screen, but also includes information about memory usage. Under Network and Internet, we find the network settings for our interfaces. These can be adjusted for each port using the Edit button. In our example, we see that the Ethernet port X4 has a static IP address, namely the corresponding default address. I will now assign a dynamic DHCP address to port X5 instead of static because I want to use it to connect the uControl to the Internet. This is necessary in order to be able to select and install apps from an app hub. After this assignment, we now see an overview of the ports and their states again. After refreshing, we see the current assignments. Other items under Network and Internet include Cellular for integrating mobile devices into our communication network, and Web Server for loading self-signed certificates for a secure connection under HTTPS, or for disabling HTTPS so that communication will only take place under HTTP without a certificate. The Apps menu item first shows us the installed apps. At this point, we have not yet installed any, but we can access the App Hub via the Install App button. This is similar to an app store, where I can select an app from a list of available apps, such as Procon Web ES for machine and plant visualization, and install it after selecting the version number that suits my needs. Apps can also be installed offline without App Hub. Under Offline Installation, simply select the installation file from your PC or notebook, which will then be loaded onto the UOS device and executed. The next menu item is Identity and Access. Here, under Users and Roles, you can create new users and assign roles that these users can assume, as well as assign corresponding rights to these roles. Under Clients, clients are created for authorized data use via the Data Hub and corresponding read and write rights are assigned. And under Access, access to the system is configured or granted. For example, when SSH access is granted, remote command line access is permitted for users with administrator rights. They can then log in to the UOS device at the Linux level using a corresponding program such as Windows PowerShell and, for example, query data via the UOS Data Hub. And with unauthenticated access, I can grant read and write rights via the Data Hub for testing purposes without authorization. However, this should really only be used for testing purposes and only temporarily. We have already become familiar with the next menu item in the UOS Control Center, Software and Updates. Here, under Update and Installation, both new UOS firmware updates and the Codesys runtime can be downloaded and executed. I will go into more detail about Codesys in the second part of this tutorial series. Under Software and Updates, we also find the menu item Hawkbit. This framework can be used to set up an automatic rollout for software updates on the UOS device. The next menu item is Recovery. Here we find Backup and Restore for creating system backups that can be restored in the event of a system failure, and Reset and Restart for resetting the UOS device to factory settings or restarting the device. Under Logs, we find system entries that are generated when the device is restarted, for example. These entries are helpful for system specialists when investigating the cause of problems, for example when services or communication drivers fail to start. And finally, the general menu item. Under Date and Time, you can set the time zone, date, and exact time for the UOS device. The time can be set either manually or via an NTP server. For automatic clock synchronization via NTP, the device must be connected to the Internet. Under CPU isolation, I can choose whether I want to select a CPU for high-priority processes for the device, with the other processes using the remaining CPU. This is disabled by default. And finally, under the About menu item, I can find information about UOS, such as the installed version or legal or license information. That's it for the UOS Control Center. Let's now go back to the home screen. Next to the tile for the UOS Control Center are the tiles for the UOS Data Hub and the UOS I/O Configurator, which we will now take a closer look at. Here we see the hardware configuration displayed graphically. At the moment, only the U-Control can be seen, in this case a U-Control M4000. We now want to connect the U-Remote input and output modules to be connected here. We can do this in the conventional way from a module catalog using drag and drop, or by using the scan button to have the system automatically recognize the connected modules. This saves an incredible amount of time when configuring the hardware. In addition to the graphical representation, the modules connected to the system bus are displayed to the left in a tree structure. By double-clicking on a module, I get more detailed information about the module and can configure it, for example the analog input module here. Here I now specify that I am using a measuring range of 0 to 10 volts. And for the temperature measurement module, I specify which temperature sensor is used. In this case, it is a PT100 with a measuring range of -200 to 850 degrees Celsius. With the Deploy button, this device configuration is now saved on the UOS device. But that's not all. This also triggers the configuration and start of a UOS Data Hub provider service that transfers I/O channel values to and from UOS Data Hub. This means that other apps can also access the variables via the Data Hub and read their contents or assign values to them. Let's take a look at the Data Hub. On the left-hand side, we can already see some data from the provider UOS ADM, that means our UOS device. By selecting an entry, for example manufacturer product type, we can display the values of the corresponding variables. And we can also see another provider in the provider list, UOS SBM. Here we can now find the entries of our input-output modules created by Deploy in the UOS I/O Configurator. Let's have a look at the values for the variables. I have connected a potentiometer to channel 0 at the analog input, with which I can change the analog value. I now turn the potentiometer in both directions, and as you can see, the corresponding value changes. As already mentioned, this provider data is available via the Data Hub to all other apps installed under UOS and can be read or modified by them with the appropriate rights and authorizations. In addition, an app with provider rights can also make data available for other apps in the Data Hub. For further information about the Data Hub, please refer to the tutorials in the Introduction to UOS Data Hub series. Okay, this tutorial has just given you a first insight into UOS. The most important points are briefly summarized here once again. We have seen what UOS actually is and what is it good for. We downloaded a UOS firmware update from the Weidmüller Support Center and installed it on a UOS device. We gained an overview of the individual functions and setting options in the UOS Control Center. We have seen how the UOS I/O configurator is used to configure the hardware of the UOS device and the connected Uremote modules. And we have looked at the data and variables available to all apps under UOS in the UOS Data Hub. In our next video in the How to Get Started with UOS series, I would like to show you how we can use a UOS device as a PLC using native codesys. Stay tuned and see you then.